Hello everyone, Brian Kibler here, coming to you with another in my constructed video series with StarCityGames.com. And as you can see on my screen, I am playing Reed Duke's Black-Green Constellation deck from the World Championship. Reed was one of the few players, actually only two players, who went 4-0 in the standard portion of the World Championship, along with Sean McLaren playing Abzan. Yuya also went undefeated. He was 3-0-1, but he sort of had that draw on his record that's a little less impressive than a win, also worth a few less points. But anyway, I actually played a lot of, or at least a reasonable amount of Constellation earlier in the season, testing it out. It was one of my favorite decks last season, back when I got to play with Mana Bloom and Primeval Bounty, but it has sort of fallen off the radar a little bit in recent weeks and made a pretty big resurgence. Both Reed and Huey and Owen, I guess that's more than both, all three of them played the deck at the World Championships and did fairly well. Reed did the best of them, and I think that this is a deck that is potentially well positioned right now because against a lot of the aggressive token style decks, you have Doomwake Giant, which is extremely powerful. Against the other mid-range decks, you have the card advantage engine of Eidolon of Blossoms plus Courser and a bunch of enchantments. Against aggressive decks, you have Whip of Erebos. You actually can't see them; they're hiding over here. The Hornet Queens. It's funny when a deck has a curve that's so high that it just breaks the normal display. I was just like, where are they? Oh yeah, they're hiding. But anyway, the deck has a lot of powerful tools. One of the best parts about this deck, or at least one of my favorite parts of the Constellation engine, is really Pharika. Pharika, when Pharika was first spoiled, I was kind of disappointed with it because I was hoping that there'd be like a really cool, powerful black-green god. And Pharika isn't a card that can go into a lot of the sort of Golgari aggro decks that I was playing at that point in time. But it is a card that plays a crucial role in a deck like this. You have a ton of colored mana symbols that can actually turn Pharika on, and some of them of which are actually quite resilient. Things like Whip of Erebos, Courser of Crufix, they're not things that generally just sort of die easily. And on top of that, the fact that Pharika makes enchantment creatures means that every time you trigger Pharika's use Pharika's ability, you trigger all of your Constellation effects. So if you have Doomwake Giant in play and use Pharika to make multiple tokens, all of your opponent's creatures will get just wiped out. Also, Pharika, exiling cards from the graveyard works very well with stuff like Commune with the Gods, Satyr Wayfinder, which also happens to dovetail nicely with Murderous Cut, which is one of just the best removal spells available in Standard if you have the tools to enable it. So there's a lot of sort of cross-cutting synergies in this deck. Things like Graveyard Mechanics plus Pharika plus Constellation plus Reanimation. So a lot of things that really mesh very well together, and that's a sign in my mind of a pretty solid deck. There are a couple, for instance, a couple of fetch lands that don't even fetch anything other than basic land. One basic forest, or rather, they can only fetch basic forests. They're green-white fetch lands, and they're just there to fill your graveyard for Murderous Cut. Which when you find the sort of okay, well, I want 2 Windswept Heaths. You know that there's a certain level of tuning that's gone on with the deck. The sideboard has a lot of pretty great tools in it too. A couple more Thought Seizes for general utility against controlling decks, against decks that you really need to disrupt. Similarly, Read the Bones against decks that are good at disrupting your creature base and picking apart your Eidolon engine, and you want to be able to have a little bit of card draw. Also, just against decks where your removal spells are pretty weak, Read the Bones is a great general replacement card. Hero's Downfall. There are some problematic cards for this deck. Things like Ashiok. Against, for instance, the Sidisi Whip deck that Shahar Shenhar won the World Championships with featured Ashiok both in the main deck and additional copies in the sideboard, and that was a sort of nod to the mid-range mirror matches, of which this is one of them. And that's just a really powerful card in the matchup that you want to be prepared to be able to deal with. So Hero's Downfall is a good sort of general purpose removal spell against big creature decks or against things that can be problematic like Planeswalkers. And then Arbor Colossus is a super powerful threat against and answer card against decks like Jeskai that are trying to beat you with things like Mantis Rider. So against those, having just a big body that can replace some of your cuter stuff, like against a deck that's trying to kill you with Mantis Rider, Doomwake Giant's a lot less impressive, but Arbor Colossus is fantastic. things like that. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and take this deck for a spin. I haven't actually played any games with this particular version, so this is going to be sort of exploratory for me. I'm going to go through my thought process as I'm trying the deck out, right after apparently I purchased some Jungle Hollows somewhere. So anyway, let's get to it.